Imagine this quiet truth before you eat anything, before medication, before the day places its demands on you. Your body is already making decisions about blood sugar. Not consciously, not emotionally, but biologically. And the way you move in the first 10 minutes of your morning can gently rewrite those decisions. When we wake up, the body naturally releases cortisol. Doctors often explain that this hormone is not the enemy. It is a survival signal. It tells the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream, preparing you for the day. But in modern life, we wake up and sit still. The sugar rises, but the muscles stay silent. This is where imbalance begins. A physician might describe muscles as the largest glucose-using organ in the body. When you move them even gently, they open microscopic doors called glucose transport channels. No insulin negotiation is required. The sugar simply flows out of the blood and into the muscle, where it is burned as energy. This is not exercise as punishment. This is movement as conversation with your cells. Slow marching, light squats, arm swings, stretching. These are not dramatic acts, yet biologically they are profound. They lower blood sugar not by force, but by cooperation. Doctors often emphasize that intensity is optional, but timing is powerful. Morning movement works with the body's natural rhythms instead of fighting them. There is also something quieter happening. Gentle exercise lowers stress signals sent from the brain. As the nervous system relaxes, the liver stops overproducing glucose. Blood sugar falls not because we demanded it, but because the body finally feels safe. This is why 10 minutes is enough, not because it is short, but because it is precise. It respects the human body as a system: muscle, hormone, emotion, and intention moving together. When practiced daily, this ritual becomes more than exercise. It becomes a reminder that health is not built in extremes, but in small, faithful acts of care. When the body wakes in the morning, it does not wait for breakfast to begin its metabolic work. Long before the first bite of food, blood sugar is already circulating, released quietly by the liver as part of the body's natural wake-up signal. Doctors often explain that this process exists to prepare us for movement, for hunting, for walking, for survival. But in the modern morning, we wake and remain still. The glucose arrives, yet the muscles do not respond. This is where gentle morning exercise becomes not just helpful, but biologically meaningful. Muscles have a unique ability that few people fully appreciate. They can absorb glucose directly from the bloodstream without needing insulin to act as a messenger. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable physiological process. When muscle fibers contract, they activate glucose transport pathways that pull sugar into the cell and convert it into usable energy. Even light movement, slow stepping, controlled squats, easy arm motions, triggers this response. A physician might say that muscles behave like a natural sponge for excess sugar, but only when they are invited to participate through movement. This matters deeply for people struggling with high blood sugar because it bypasses one of the most fragile systems in the body: insulin signaling. In insulin resistance, the message of insulin grows weaker, but muscle contraction speaks a different language entirely. It is direct, immediate, and efficient. 10 minutes of movement can lower circulating glucose not by forcing the pancreas to work harder, but by reducing the demand placed upon it. In this way, exercise becomes protective rather than exhausting. There is a subtle elegance to doing this in the morning. At this time, blood sugar is often elevated due to hormonal rhythms, not dietary choices. Gentle exercise intercepts this rise at its source. Doctors often note that when glucose is used early, it prevents a cascade of metabolic stress later in the day. Less sugar circulating means less inflammation, less oxidative strain on blood vessels, and less pressure on insulin production. The body experiences balance before imbalance has a chance to form. What makes this approach powerful is not intensity, but timing and intention. Heavy workouts are not required. In fact, overly intense exercise can temporarily raise blood sugar by increasing stress hormones. Gentle morning movement does the opposite. It signals safety. It tells the nervous system that the body is active but not threatened. As stress hormones soften, glucose release slows, and blood sugar stabilizes in a way that feels natural rather than forced. There is also a psychological dimension that medicine increasingly acknowledges. Morning exercise establishes a sense of agency over the body. Instead of reacting to blood sugar numbers later in the day, the individual participates in prevention. Doctors often emphasize that consistency matters more than perfection, and this is where 10 minutes becomes realistic, sustainable, and deeply human. It is short enough to repeat daily, yet meaningful enough to change internal chemistry. In this light, morning exercise is not a fitness trend. It is a biological conversation between muscle and blood, movement and metabolism, intention and physiology. It honors the body's design rather than correcting its failure. When muscles wake before meals, they guide sugar gently where it belongs, allowing the rest of the system to breathe more easily, adapt more calmly, and function with quiet efficiency. Stress is often treated as something abstract, a mental weight carried quietly through the day, but within the body it is a precise and powerful biochemical event. Physicians frequently explain that the brain does not ask whether a threat is emotional or physical before responding. It simply reacts. When stress is perceived, the nervous system activates survival pathways designed to protect life, and one of its first actions is to raise blood sugar. This response evolved to support movement and escape, yet in modern life it is often triggered by thoughts, deadlines, and uncertainty rather than true danger. In the morning, this process is already underway. Cortisol naturally rises as part of the body's circadian rhythm, helping us wake, focus, and mobilize energy. This rise is healthy and necessary. However, when the mind greets the day with tension or worry, cortisol levels can climb higher than needed. Doctors often note that this amplified signal instructs the liver to release additional glucose into the bloodstream. The liver obeys faithfully, unaware that the stress is internal rather than physical, and blood sugar rises even before food is consumed. Gentle morning exercise interrupts this cycle in a subtle but profound way. Light movement sends feedback from the muscles to the brain, signaling that the body is active and capable. This feedback shifts the nervous system away from a state of threat and toward one of regulation. Heart rate increases slightly, breathing becomes deeper and more rhythmic, and the brain begins to reduce the intensity of its alarm signals. As this happens, cortisol and adrenaline levels begin to soften, and the liver receives a quieter instruction regarding glucose release. Doctors often emphasize that this calming effect is not psychological alone. It is physiological and measurable. Low-intensity exercise has been shown to lower stress hormone levels while improving the body's sensitivity to insulin. Unlike intense workouts, which can further stimulate stress pathways, gentle movement reassures the system. It tells the body that energy is being used appropriately and that there is no need to flood the bloodstream with excess fuel. The liver plays a central role in this process. It acts as both a reservoir and a regulator of glucose, responding closely to hormonal and neural signals. Under stress, the liver increases glucose output to meet perceived demand. When the nervous system calms, this output naturally decreases. Gentle morning movement functions as a signal of controlled demand rather than emergency, allowing the liver to adjust its behavior without resistance. Blood sugar levels begin to settle not through force, but through cooperation between systems. There is also a distinction that clinicians increasingly highlight between movement that excites the nervous system and movement that regulates it. High-intensity exercise can be valuable for cardiovascular fitness, yet when performed under conditions of existing stress or poor sleep, it may temporarily elevate blood sugar. Gentle exercise, by contrast, lowers blood sugar by calming the body's internal environment. It reduces sympathetic nervous system activity while supporting parasympathetic tone, the branch associated with rest, digestion, and repair. Beyond hormones and organs, stress reshapes how the body experiences time. When stressed, the mind rushes ahead, anticipating challenges before they arrive. Gentle morning movement anchors attention in the present. Physicians now recognize that this shift in awareness has tangible physiological effects. Slower breathing patterns improve oxygen delivery, reduce muscle tension, and further quiet stress signals sent to the liver. Blood sugar responds accordingly, stabilizing as the body moves from anticipation to engagement. This daily practice also retrains the stress response over time. The body learns that mornings no longer signal urgency alone, but measured activity followed by calm. Doctors often observe that individuals who begin their day with gentle movement experience fewer glucose spikes later, not because stress disappears, but because the body becomes more accurate in its interpretation of stress. The nervous system learns that not every signal requires a full metabolic response. There is a compassionate element in this approach that medicine increasingly values. Stress is not a personal failure. It is a biological reflex shaped by environment and experience. Gentle morning exercise does not demand suppression of stress, but offers the body a different option. It provides a physical language through which the body can express readiness without panic. Blood sugar lowers as a side effect of restored trust between brain, liver, and muscle. Over weeks and months, this relationship deepens. Morning movement becomes a ritual of reassurance, reminding the body that it is supported and capable. The liver grows less reactive, stress hormones rise with more precision, and glucose is released in amounts that match true need. In this way, 10 minutes of gentle exercise transforms stress from a disruptive force into a manageable signal, allowing blood sugar to settle into a rhythm that feels steady, responsive, and sustainable. Muscle is often thought of only in terms of strength or appearance, yet from a biological perspective, it is one of the most important metabolic organs in the human body. Doctors frequently explain that skeletal muscle is responsible for the majority of glucose disposal after it enters the bloodstream. In simple terms, muscle acts as a primary destination for sugar, a place where energy can be safely stored or immediately used. When muscles remain inactive, this pathway lies dormant, and glucose lingers in the blood longer than it should. In the morning, this relationship becomes especially important. Blood sugar tends to rise due to hormonal signals designed to prepare the body for activity. If muscles are still, the sugar has nowhere to go. Physicians sometimes describe this situation as a traffic jam in the bloodstream, not because too much sugar exists, but because the exits are closed. Muscle contraction opens those exits. The moment a muscle fiber shortens and lengthens, it creates a demand for energy, and glucose moves from the blood into the cell. This process does not rely solely on insulin. While insulin normally acts as a key that allows glucose into cells, muscle contraction activates an alternate pathway that bypasses insulin signaling altogether. Doctors emphasize this point because it explains why movement is so powerful for individuals with insulin resistance. Even when insulin's message is weakened, muscle contraction speaks clearly. It pulls glucose inward through direct biochemical signals, reducing blood sugar levels efficiently and naturally. Gentle exercise is sufficient to trigger this effect. Walking in place, slow squats, controlled leg lifts, or arm movements all recruit large muscle groups. Each contraction signals a need for fuel, and glucose responds by leaving the bloodstream. Physicians often note that this is not about burning calories in a dramatic sense. It is about relocating sugar from a harmful environment into a useful one. Once inside the muscle, glucose can be stored as glycogen or used immediately to support movement and cellular repair. There is an elegance in how quickly this happens. Within minutes of beginning movement, muscles increase their uptake of glucose. This is why short bouts of activity can have a measurable impact on blood sugar readings. Doctors frequently encourage patients to view muscles as active partners in glucose management rather than passive tissue. When activated regularly, muscles become more efficient at absorbing sugar, even at rest. Morning activation has a unique advantage. Muscles that are engaged early in the day become metabolically primed. Their increased sensitivity to glucose can persist for hours, allowing subsequent meals to be handled more smoothly. Physicians often explain that this early engagement reduces the burden placed on insulin later, smoothing post-meal glucose rises. The body operates more evenly when muscles have already been invited into the metabolic conversation. There is also a protective aspect to this process. High blood sugar is damaging not because glucose itself is harmful, but because prolonged exposure disrupts delicate tissues. When muscles act as a sink for glucose, they protect blood vessels, nerves, and organs from this excess exposure. Doctors often describe muscle as a buffer, absorbing fluctuations and maintaining balance within the internal environment. This buffering capacity improves with consistency. Muscles adapt to regular use by increasing their storage capacity for glycogen and improving their internal machinery for glucose transport. Over time, even light daily movement can expand the muscle's ability to manage sugar. Physicians frequently reassure patients that improvement does not require dramatic transformation. The body responds to repeated signals, not occasional extremes. Beyond physiology, there is a deeper implication. Activating muscles in the morning restores a sense of participation in one's own biology. Instead of viewing blood sugar as an external number to be controlled, the individual becomes part of the regulation process. Medicine increasingly recognizes that this engagement has tangible benefits, reducing stress and improving adherence to healthy behaviors. Muscles, when awakened, do more than move the body. They guide energy, stabilize chemistry, and communicate with nearly every system involved in metabolic health. By acting as a natural sink for glucose, they transform excess into function, imbalance into motion. In this way, gentle morning movement allows the body to use what it already has, efficiently and wisely, directing sugar away from harm and toward purpose. In conversations about health, intensity often steals the spotlight. There is a quiet assumption that effort must be dramatic to be effective, that change requires strain, sweat, and exhaustion. Yet doctors who study long-term metabolic health often point to a different truth. The body adapts not to occasional extremes, but to repeated signals. It is consistency, not intensity, that teaches the nervous system, muscles, and metabolism how to behave day after day. When exercise is intense, it creates a powerful stimulus, but it is also transient. Stress hormones rise, energy demands spike, and the body responds as it would to a short-term challenge. For some individuals, especially those with unstable blood sugar, this can temporarily raise glucose levels. Physicians frequently caution that while intense exercise has benefits, it does not always translate into steady metabolic control. The body may interpret it as a threat rather than a supportive signal. Consistency works differently. Gentle daily movement sends a message that is clear, predictable, and safe. Each repetition reinforces neural pathways and metabolic responses that favor balance. Doctors often explain that when the body encounters the same mild stimulus repeatedly, it stops reacting defensively and begins to adapt constructively. Muscles become more efficient at absorbing glucose, insulin sensitivity improves, and stress responses soften without being suppressed. The human body is designed to learn through repetition. Every system, from the brain to the muscles, responds to patterns. When movement becomes a daily ritual rather than an occasional event, it reshapes baseline physiology. Physicians note that blood sugar control improves not because any single session was extraordinary, but because the body has recalibrated its expectations. It begins to assume regular activity and adjusts hormone release, glucose handling, and energy distribution accordingly. There is also a psychological dimension that reinforces this biological effect. Intense routines often rely on motivation, which fluctuates with mood, energy, and circumstance. Gentle practices rely on habit. Doctors increasingly recognize that habits bypass the emotional negotiation that so often derails health plans. A 10-minute routine that feels achievable becomes part of identity rather than an obligation. This continuity reduces stress, which itself plays a role in blood sugar regulation. From a medical perspective, consistency protects the body from extremes. Repeated gentle movement improves circulation, enhances mitochondrial function, and supports joint health without excessive strain. Physicians often emphasize that the goal is not to push the body into adaptation through force, but to invite adaptation through familiarity. Over time, this approach yields changes that are stable and sustainable. Blood sugar regulation responds particularly well to this pattern. Each session of gentle movement lowers glucose modestly, but the cumulative effect is profound. The body becomes better at clearing glucose even on days when movement is minimal. Doctors explain that muscles retain improved insulin sensitivity for hours after activity, and when activity occurs daily, this benefit overlaps and extends, creating a more stable metabolic environment. Intensity can also introduce inconsistency through injury, fatigue, or burnout. When exercise is too demanding, recovery time increases and routines are disrupted. Physicians often observe that patients abandon intense programs not because they lack discipline, but because the body resists repeated strain. Gentle movement, by contrast, respects the body's limits and encourages continuation. It becomes something the body looks forward to rather than avoids. There is a quiet philosophy embedded in this approach. Health is not a performance, it is a relationship. Consistent movement is a form of listening, of responding to the body's needs rather than imposing expectations upon it. Medicine increasingly supports this view, recognizing that sustainable health emerges from cooperation between intention and physiology. Over time, consistent gentle exercise reshapes the body's internal dialogue. Blood sugar fluctuations become less dramatic, energy levels stabilize, and the nervous system learns that movement is a regular part of life, not an emergency. This steady rhythm allows the body to operate with greater efficiency and less strain. In choosing consistency over intensity, the individual aligns with the body's natural preference for patterns, allowing health to unfold gradually, reliably, and with enduring balance. The human body is not a collection of separate parts, but a living conversation between the brain, the muscles, the organs, and the bloodstream. Modern medicine increasingly recognizes that movement is one of the most powerful ways to restore this conversation. When movement is mindful rather than mechanical, it becomes a bridge between thought and physiology, allowing the brain and body to work together instead of in opposition. In the morning, this connection is especially fragile. The mind often wakes before the body, already reaching into the day ahead. Worries, plans, and expectations activate neural circuits linked to stress, and the body responds as if action is required immediately. Blood sugar rises, muscles tense, breathing becomes shallow. Gentle, Mindful movement interrupts this pattern by grounding awareness in physical sensation. Doctors often explain that when attention shifts to movement and breath, the brain recalibrates its priorities. Mindful movement influences blood sugar through the nervous system. The brain governs hormonal output, and hormones govern glucose levels. When the brain perceives calm engagement rather than urgency, it reduces the release of stress hormones that elevate blood sugar. Physicians note that even simple movements performed with awareness can activate parasympathetic pathways, slowing heart rate and improving glucose regulation. The body does not need to be pushed, it needs to feel coordinated. There is a biological logic to pairing movement with awareness. Muscles send sensory information back to the brain with every contraction. When movement is rushed or unconscious, this feedback is limited. When movement is slow and intentional, sensory input increases, refining communication between the nervous system and the body. Doctors increasingly acknowledge that this improved communication enhances metabolic efficiency, allowing blood sugar to be managed with greater precision. This reconnection also affects breathing, a powerful but often overlooked regulator of blood chemistry. Mindful movement naturally deepens and slows the breath. Physicians often point out that steady breathing reduces sympathetic nervous system activity, which in turn lowers glucose release from the liver. Oxygen delivery improves, muscle tension decreases, and the body settles into a rhythm that supports stable blood sugar. These changes are subtle but cumulative, shaping the body's internal environment over time. Beyond physiology, mindful movement restores a sense of agency. Many people experience blood sugar as something that happens to them, measured by numbers and influenced by factors beyond their control. Mindful movement reframes this experience. It allows individuals to participate actively in regulation, using attention and intention as tools alongside muscle and metabolism. Doctors note that this sense of participation reduces anxiety, which itself contributes to better glucose control. The brain thrives on coherence. When thoughts, movement, and breath align, neural activity becomes more organized. Medicine now recognizes that this coherence influences hormonal balance and metabolic function. Gentle morning movement practiced with awareness creates this alignment, offering the brain a stable pattern to follow. Blood sugar responds not because it is being targeted directly, but because the systems that govern it are working in harmony. There is also a long-term effect that emerges with practice. Mindful movement trains the brain to associate activity with calm rather than stress. Over time, this association extends beyond exercise into daily life. Doctors often observe that individuals who practice mindful movement respond to challenges with less physiological reactivity. Blood sugar spikes become less frequent not because stress disappears, but because the body interprets stress differently. This practice is an expression of compassion toward the body. Instead of demanding performance, mindful movement offers presence. It acknowledges fatigue, aging, and limitation without judgment. Medicine increasingly supports this approach, recognizing that compassion reduces stress responses and supports healing. When the body feels respected, it functions more efficiently, conserving energy and regulating glucose with greater ease. In this way, mindful movement reconnects the brain, body, and blood chemistry into a single, responsive system. It transforms exercise from a task into a dialogue, from obligation into understanding. Blood sugar lowers as a reflection of restored balance, guided by attention, supported by movement, and sustained by a calm, attentive relationship with the body itself